Check it out,
Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Peterson, host of the podcast WDcast, which is called WDcast because it's brought to you by WD Partners, whose tag is Innovation at Scale, which means that WD has services that range from strategy, design, digital, and operations to architecture and construction management, end-to-end services. That's WDpartners.com. Thank you, WD Partners, for letting me do this. The mission of the show, so you know, is WDcast is to talk to smart people about the burning business platforms of the 21st century and the challenges involved. Not so concerned about what the business is, as long as it's on fire. And so there's always a lot to talk about, especially in this day and age. And today we've got a very special guest with us. He is an artist, an entrepreneur, and a dad, and also a friend. And I would personally add to this guy's resume, he has never sold out. It's Joey Monsoon. Check it out, Joe. Hello, Joey. Thanks for joining us. And how are you today?
Good morning, Lee. Thanks for having me. I am doing well today. Thank you.
A little disclaimer, the thoughts and opinions expressed today belong to the members of this discussion, do not necessarily represent those of the companies that they work for, which is pretty much WD Partners in this case. So, Joey, could you please give us the story of your background? How did you get where you are today?
Well, I am a self-taught artist, so I didn't actually go to art school. Grew up around the Columbus area. I didn't really start painting until probably my mid to late 30s. You know, I just never stopped drawing. Educating myself on the kind of art that interested me, to learn techniques and to kind of see how things were being done, how they were created. I eventually decided, well, I should probably learn how to paint. You know, it wasn't always easy or successful, but it was a great way for me to kind of fall back on those things that had interested me in growing up and the kind of collection of things that I had put together through my life and use those as kind of my curriculum to teach myself how to do these things. And so from that point, Columbus was a great place to kind of emerge as an artist during that time. And still today, Columbus is very generous to ideas when it comes to independent artists. Cooperation between local artists. So local artists in this town are always looking out for each other. Great place for me to emerge and to kind of figure out what I was doing. And so I think I was lucky to kind of be in this city on the path that I was on. And so I met a few people who were kind of doing what I was doing. And I kind of got involved in those group shows and people seemed to enjoy the work that I was making. Then I would do a larger group show. And then eventually a local gallery owner reached out to me, Duff Lindsay from Lindsay Gallery, and asked if I would be interested in having a solo show at his gallery.
But totally self-taught.
Totally self-taught.
In your basement.
In my basement, yeah.
Isn't that, there's got to be a lot of trial and error with that.
Oh, yeah, certainly. You know, when you consider the fact that I never stopped drawing. And so, you know, while I had to learn to paint, I had to learn the materials and the mechanics of paint, the foundation of visual creativity was always there.
Yeah, interesting. And we were talking about this a little bit before we started. You know, we have a process here. We do commercial art here, and I understand that process. I've been doing commercial art for 20-some years. But the process that you work with has got to be a lot different. We're talking about the difference between commercial art and art. So talk a little bit about that, about what gets you motivated, or how do you start, and then how do you kind of go down the road with something that you're working on?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation that I'm in. So my process would differ if I'm specifically working on a show that I have coming up. I have an exhibition on the calendar that I'm working towards, as opposed to if I don't have a particular goal.
Deadline.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I have a deadline, generally my process is to initially come up with a general theme of what I want the work to be about. I'll also consider a color palette. The purpose of those is to find a way to make all of the paintings work together. I'm not a narrative painter, so I'm not trying to tell a story from one painting to the next. If I'm creating work for an exhibition, I want all of the pieces within that exhibition to feel like they belong together in a room. You know, I'm a figurative painter, so typically my work is always going to be about the human body, about the form. Typically, I will try to do most of the drawings and sketches before I start painting any of the paintings. That helps me keep control of the overall theme. And then I'll start the actual work of painting. And the work of painting is where it switches from a plan, where I've talked about the themes and the color palette and the sketches, kind of the marks and the paint to take me in new directions.
I have painters in my family, so I know a little bit about this, but trial and error in painting. I mean, you can only picture like Van Gogh throwing a painting out the window. Like, I hate this. Does that type of thing happen? I mean, you have a color palette in mind, and you start to go down the road. Did you ever think, I don't like this at all now that I see it?
I think trial and error and experimentation are the same thing, and specifically taking risks are probably the most important thing to me when it comes to creating a painting. So the worst thing that I can do is to create a really tight drawing and try to reproduce that really tight drawing in a really tight painting. To be honest, most of the great marks that I make and my favorite parts of certain paintings are when something happened that I didn't expect to happen. And so, trial and error is not only a part of it, but it's maybe the most important part.
Yeah, it's really interesting because just in the last 30 years, and we work in retail quite a bit. I'm trying to make a correlation here, but a lot of times in retail, I think everything became rote, over the last 30 years, like banging out stores, doing that type of thing. And along came the .com guys, and they think how you just described. They think like, well, let me try this. That didn't work. Okay, let's keep going on. Like trial and error is a part of their process. I just read somewhere, failure is knowledge, knowledge is success. So basically, you have to fail to succeed.
Sure.
Same, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And I had to fail to learn how to fail. So that being said, as I started painting, I didn't figure this out right away. Like, I have to take risks. I have to make mistakes. When I started out, I thought, well, this has to be perfect and this has to be perfect and this line has to be just right. But it didn't take long for kind of the spirit and the passion and the enjoyment of doing it to be negatively affected by that sort of pursuit of perfection and that pursuit of getting it just right. I had to learn that to really love the process and to love the outcome, I need to allow things to happen. I need to make mistakes. I need to scrape things off. I need to paint over things and not be afraid to destroy something good to make something great.
So have you ever walked away and gone, I nailed it? I mean, that is perfect.
Sure.
Really?
Sure.
Awesome.
But I've also walked away the next day after doing something else to that same piece and walked away and say, I've destroyed it. Now what am I going to do? That's really, for me, that's really the process. Do something cool, do something terrible. Do something cool, do something terrible. And it's that kind of back and forth every day. I mean, you'll have a good day, it's a constant roller coaster of being really pleased with how things are going and then just being really dejected about how things are going. And it's happened so many times that I began to understand that's how it works.
Right.
That's,
being dejected is part of it.
Yeah, that's part of it. Then I know, well, the world's not ending because I know the next time I come back, chances are it's going to be awesome.
The kind of unfortunate part about commercial art is you go through trial and error and then you start closing in on a deadline and it's all over. Right. You got to run with what you got. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in your heart or as a leader, you don't have as much influence. You want to let people make mistakes, but you just know it's a mistake.
Right. Yeah, and to be fair, all of this is happening in my own mind. What I may think is a success doesn't necessarily translate as a success to the gallery owner or to the collector or even to the audience. So, I find that many times I'll have an exhibition and let's say there's 12 paintings in the exhibition, there'll be 2 or 3 that I'm like, these are hands down the strongest paintings in the show. And then there'll probably be 2 or 3 where I'm like, these aren't my best work, but they work within the greater body of the work. And more times than not, the paintings that I question are the first to sell. And the paintings that I think are the strongest are often the last to sell.
Yeah, damn public.
Right. So that, to your example of someone having to step up and say, this is a mistake, that doesn't happen for me until the exhibition happens. And then it really becomes relative to what is a mistake. I mean, I'm not, I'm a fine artist, so I don't really care whether someone else thinks it's a mistake or not.
I was just going to ask you that about criticism because, one of the things that you do in a commercial art process is we do crits like all the time. So you get people together and you go, let's see what you got. Like, we have 3 weeks to get this done. Like, where are you in the process? And people bring their work up, whether it's graphic design or environments design or something like that. And then we all kind of like an art class, jump on it. Mm-hmm. How do you handle, you're alone. So how do you handle criticism when you finally get it? Because you may not get it till you're done.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, like art school, because since I didn't go to art school, I never had to go through those crits. I never experienced that. I never, I probably would have lost my mind. Also, that being said, I'm my worst critic as the cliche goes. No one's more hard on the work that I'm doing and more critical. I know I'm not the greatest painter in the world. And if, I'm friends with a lot of artists here in Columbus who are really, really amazing artists who, in my perspective, I think are way more talented and creative people than I am. If they have something to say about my work, I absolutely look forward to hearing it because I hold them in such high respect. So if I'm getting feedback from someone who I respect and I know that they appreciate art and that they appreciate painting and that they understand expression and all of those things, then I take that to heart. I don't look at it as a negative. I look at it as an opportunity for me to soak something else in. But that being said, if it's, someone who walks off the street during gallery hop and they don't get the painting, I couldn't care less, to be honest.
It's like putting out a song and you're like, yeah, there it is.
Right. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. Now, I'm extremely fortunate that people have been interested in my work and that I've been able to sell work. But, ultimately, when it comes down to it, I'm looking to please myself, not them.
Interesting. Yeah, which is a big difference with commercial art where you have a client and it's a crapshoot.
Right.
Really is. You don't know who's going to walk in that meeting that day and what sort of skill level they have compared to what, you and your teams are. Mm-hmm. It could be 0 and they could just, I don't like it. I hate it. Get it out of here.
Right.
And you spent, 2 months working on it.
No, I don't sell all my paintings. So there are, there are many paintings that people don't enjoy and that the judges of the audience have decided aren't worth buying or looking at. And so, it still affects me that way, but it's not something that has to drive or determine the goal.
Right. I'm not going to make this to sell it.
Right.
One thing I've noticed about your work, like over the years, 'cause I'm familiar with it, like from just about day one.
Right.
It gets better and better.
Thank you.
And I think the last show I went to was, stunning. Kicking myself in the ass that I should have bought a bunch of it a lot earlier. But do you notice that too? Do you feel like you're improving, that as you go along, you get better?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. That's the only driver for me. That's what I'm trying to do. That's the only thing that brings me pleasure in the process is the fact that I'm pushing myself to improve. So I can only judge myself against myself.
So we've been kind of talking a little bit like of a circle around this topic, but there's a commercial aspect to what you do too.
Sure.
It's just a lot of different. It's just, completely different. But at the end of the day, it still amounts to your success is ultimately measured. We joke around, and we were joking around earlier about you do this in the basement.
Right.
And you actually do it in your basement, but you're not going to do that forever. Then it becomes more of a hobby. But what you're actually doing is selling these things and doing really well at it. So talk to us about the process of the commercial end of it. How did it start? Does somebody come up to you and say, man, it looks really good, you should sell that? Or
yeah, I think for just speaking in terms of my own experience, the way that it worked for me was that, again, I was just doing stuff on my own. I was just drawing and messing around and doing a little bit of experimenting with paints. As I said, I've always been an admirer of art. So I would go to art shows, I would buy art books, all that sort of thing. And so at the time in Columbus, there were a lot of really great kind of independent venues for art. A place in Grandview called Junction View at the time. It was a large building that had been converted into artist studios. They would have group shows there and that sort of thing. And so I would go there to check out art. Basically, I saw work of a particular artist who I really liked, and I just reached out to him and said, hey, I like your stuff. here's my stuff, not really with any sort of intent other than to make a connection with someone. And to kind of go off on a branch a bit there, because I am self-taught, I didn't have a community. I didn't have a group of artists to bounce ideas off of. I have many friends. I have some really close, wonderful friends that mean the world to me, but none of them are artists. That was one thing that I was lacking, was having someone to bounce ideas off of. And so when I reached out to this guy, just to let him know that I liked his work and show him my work, and it was just really an attempt to connect with someone and be able to talk about those things. He was starting a small art group in Columbus that he wanted to start doing group shows with, and he liked the work that I showed him and invited me to be a part of it.
So it's a little like anything else. It's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know.
Yep. Yeah, it was total serendipity, and got started with those guys and started just doing a few little group shows. I mean, I was selling paintings for $50 and got good response, got good feedback. And so started doing more of those and started creating a little bit of buzz around the area. And that's when the Lindsay Gallery reached out to me.
Okay. So how did he find out about you?
I had done a show with the Ohio Art League, which was kind of my big debut. And I had a solo show there. And because I'm self-taught, this particular gallery only deals with folk art, outsider art, and self-taught.
Oh, really?
And so because I'm self-taught, he reached out and said, he liked my work and reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in having a show at his gallery. And I was familiar with his gallery and had been to his gallery and respected the work that was there. I had no expectations of these things. I mean, the path that I've been on started out with really no expectations other than just making cool stuff and sharing it with people and that sort of thing.
You had a day job.
And so it really just kind of snowballed from there. And then once I was in that particular gallery, which is a really well-respected, nationally known gallery, we had our first show there. And I can remember we started talking about pricing, and he was coming up with prices for these paintings. And I was like, oh my God, you can't be serious. I mean, I was almost afraid that he was going to try to charge this much for these paintings.
Yeah.
And I was petrified for the first show that these people who had seen my work, for the last year were going to come in here and see the new work and see the new prices and laugh. But really the exact opposite happened. It was great. We sold it out the first night.
It's interesting. You're talking about what you're talking about is like the true value of what you created, not necessarily what it cost to make or anything like that, or how long it took you or how many hours it took you. It's none of that crap. It's like, what is the value of that? I mean, because if you hang that up in somebody's house, think of that. I mean, it's something that they could look at for the rest of their lives or, pass down to their kids. It's
cool.
Yeah, super cool.
It's really cool.
Or does that ever strike you like, oh my God, I did 4 works, that I really loved, and they're in these people's houses that I met briefly, and now they have them forever.
Yeah, it was really strange at first to have paintings leave my house. Typically, I would work on stuff and it would go in a drawer here or in a closet here. It was strange at the beginning to make something and then it was gone, and it was in, like you said, it was in someone's house. There have been moments like that throughout, my time as an artist that have been surreal. One of my greatest achievements was that I was once a question on In the Know, which is like the local high school trivia show on public access.
Do you remember what the question was?
I believe they showed one of my paintings, and then they said,
"Who's this?
What I had won like best local artist in Columbus."
Yeah.
None of them had a clue who I was. But the fact that, to me, that was an amazing achievement to be a question on In the Know, which is something that's always been this weird peripheral kind of funny.
Yeah, I think I know the guy that runs that.
Right. He used to come into the store. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that was one. And I've had people get tattoos of my paintings.
Wow.
Yeah. Most recently, I was able to be a part of a group of artists that traveled to Cuba. And we had a sort of a dual exhibition. And so some Columbus artists showed work in Cuba and some Cuban artists showed work here in Columbus. And the Columbus Museum of Art selected a couple pieces from those 2 shows to display in the museum. And so my painting was selected to be in the Columbus Museum of Art. So, I mean, that's an incredible moment for me.
So that leads to what I was just thinking about, which is, did you ever think about making it big? Like what would happen if you
I have no idea. I mean, I don't really, fame to me isn't something that I'm interested in. We talked about the museum. If there's any real goal for me as a painter beyond making good paintings, interesting to look at and to kind of be pulled into, it would be to have one of my pieces in a museum collection. But that's really it. I'm not interested in people all over the country knowing who I am. I mean, if it happens, obviously that would be fine. But I don't have any drive or motivation to be famous.
Yeah.
It's all really just driven by making a good painting. That's the truth.
I believe it. Especially now, like what comes with fame, I don't know too many people that would want that.
Right.
Really. You know what I mean?
Right.
Social media just light you up. You're suddenly hated by all these people on Twitter, and then you read it and you start to lose a little confidence. And
yeah, I think if you asked me this question if I was now 20 or 25 or something like that, I would be like, oh yeah, I want to take over the world. Almost 50, man, I don't want any part of that.
I think one of the things I learned about leadership, and it sounds really similar, it's like a bell curve, sort of, and it was that way with the work that we did as well, where, there's a group of haters,
right?
Then there's a group of lovers that just love everything you do, and it's, oh my God, it's fabulous. Everybody else is sort of ambivalent in the middle, and as long as that center of the bell curve is positive, generally, like, yeah, your stuff is really good, and et cetera, you can ignore the haters. It's like, whatever,
right?
Like you said in the beginning, I don't care,
right?
And I think as a leader or as an artist, it's a very similar tactic where it's a difficult thing, I think, where you have to look at all these people that are maybe putting stuff on social media or whatever, and they don't like you. So your goal in life has to be to completely ignore them and to move on and do what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, especially in a fine art creative field, and I can only speak to painting. I feel like the worst thing that you can do is to get caught up in what people think about you or think about your work while you're making it.
Where do you go? What do you do? What do you look for inspiration?
I mean, as I mentioned before, my sole subject matter in painting is people. They've seen life, they've lived life, and to me, they've endured life, and there's a triumphant aspect to them. I think that's the real inspiration behind the work, to constantly become better at communicating that thought by painting the body. And there are artists who inspire me. There's music that inspires me, but the real inspiration for the work itself is that.
And I would imagine, like with the human body, there's so many different types. I mean, it's everybody is a snowflake,
right?
I like to say, and so there's. I mean, did you ever, run across somebody and say, hey, can I paint you, just because of what you're seeing, like what your eye goes to in terms of a body?
Yeah, I think I've definitely thought that many times. The way that I work, most of the figures that I paint most of the time are from my imagination, so I'm not typically using a model references from photographs. But in general, I'm not painting a representation of a particular person.
So technology, with just about everything we do and everything, has really affected everything. Has it affected you and what you do?
I mean, sure, it's affected me in some way. I think it's affected how we see art in a big way, specifically visual art and specifically social media like Instagram. I think Instagram has had a huge impact on visual artists. I think the positive impact that Instagram has had is that it's expanded your potential audience. If you're someone who paints or draws or makes any sort of visual art, you can reach thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, probably similarly in some ways to the music industry.
Yeah.
Where before digital music, there was a certain path that you had to follow in order to become a successful musician or to get a record deal, right? And then once digital music came and the internet came, you can, although it had, often detrimental effects on the music industry. It also then became a way for anyone with a guitar or a sampler or a keyboard, if they could find an audience that was interested in them, they could become known. They could potentially find a place in the world as a creative person. And so I think that is a similar path that Instagram has created for visual artists. But I would say there's also an equally negative reaction or a negative outcome of Instagram to visual artists, and that it's shortened the time spent looking at a piece of art. As much as it's expanded the audience, it has reduced the time that we take to look at a piece of art. But within 30 seconds, I may look at 20 different pieces of art, and that's really, the work is really being robbed of its power because I'm looking at it. If it's something I really love, I might look at it for 5 seconds or 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But if I go to a gallery or I go to a museum and I see a painting that I love, I may stand in front of it for 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, that's really true with music too, right? Because at one point in time, it was an album.
Right.
And you would listen to the whole album. And I think that's where, this is going way back, but let's say that the Doors song, The End, I don't think that today would ever have even been heard.
No, way too long.
Everything that made it great over time would never even have been exposed. So you kind of wonder what we're missing.
Right. So I think that when you're an artist and you look at Instagram as a great way for people to see your work, you're right. But if that's the only way that they're seeing your work, if they're not seeing it in person, they're losing so much of what you're doing just because they're looking at it for a few seconds.
Well, it is on the upside, though. I mean, you can actually talk to a machine, talk to your son or something like that, and say, "You ever hear of this guy Van Gogh?" And he's like, "No, what's Van Gogh?" Well, let me show you.
Right.
The best Van Gogh, and like bang, 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 you could just go through it. And let me show you the difference between that and this artist and Da Vinci. Well, what's so great about Da Vinci? Well, I'll show you what's so great about Da Vinci, just kind of like at your fingertips, which changed that game. So I guess with technology, it's the same story, right? A lot of good and a lot of bad.
Yeah, I think you make a great point that there are parts of that ability to have instant access to information and to visuals that's extremely helpful and extremely educational. Because in a situation that you just described, you are going out looking for something specifically and you're spending time looking at it, right? Where Instagram specifically or any sort of those kind of phone-based scrolling platforms, they're built to keep going and keep going and keep going.
Okay, it's almost impossible, I think, nowadays or at any time at all to not talk about art and politics. And, examples that we've talked about before, Shepard Fairey, Gabrielle Curie, or Banksy, I know you're a fan of Banksy.
Sure.
Do politics ever come into play with what you do?
They don't. I don't think about a political narrative or a political agenda. In that regard, there may be things that subconsciously are coming through in the work that I make, but I don't, with any intention, am I creating anything political about my art. Any
artists that we should be paying attention to that maybe caught your eye?
Well, I would actually like to spin it this way. The artists that I would encourage people to pay attention to are their kids. I think that there's a power in art, especially in children. And when we look at kids, they're all creative. And they're in the kindergarten, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, middle school. They're creative, they're drawing, they're communicating through drawing and painting and building things. And I think at some point we stop encouraging them and we stop acknowledging their creativity.
Sort of beat it out of them.
Yeah, and we kind of steer them towards things that seem to be more practical. So my answer to that question was, if there's an artist that you should be paying more attention to, pay attention to your kids, allow them to keep that going throughout their life and not lose that love of drawing and painting and dancing and singing and creativity when they're a kid.
Wow, that is just, I think it's the best thing I've heard in a long time, and strikes a personal note too, because I had a daughter who went, pretty much all the way through high school, and then she happened to take a class in photography, and out came, her true creative spirit. It was phenomenal. And I remember looking at her portfolio, like junior year of high school, thinking, okay, let me just take a look at this. Your kids' work.
Right.
And you have a tendency to go, oh, yeah, my kid's painting is great. It's little stick drawings at first and stuff like that. And I started to look through her portfolio and I thought, this is stunning, like just beautiful and incredible. And from there, we took her down a different path and she wound up at the Art Institute of Chicago and she's still doing art, just phenomenal stuff.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think there's an artist in every one of us.
Sure. And
the more we go through this like incredible phase of technology, the more we're going to need that side of it. Because I think there's the tactical side to everything, and then there's the art side of everything. And boy, I can't think of a better time in my life when we didn't need it more.
Yeah, I agree. I think, just like what you said, I think technology is going to take care of so many non-creative things for us that our creativity is what's going to set us apart, what's going to make us human.
And what's the expression? Robot can't do that?
Right.
Okay, before I get into a couple of little bit lighter questions, anything you want to add on the art side? You got shows coming up? Anything going on?
I don't. I had my most recent show at the end of last year. I'm typically on about a 16 to 18 month cycle between solo shows.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So one of the great things about it is I'm now right in the middle of a time where I don't have a deadline, I don't have a show. And so this is the time where I can just take all the risks. I take some kind of joy now in mistakes and learning from those errors. And, there would have been a time where I would work on a painting and leave a session and feel like I really did something amazing on that session. And when I come back to work on it the next day, I would be dancing around that area and trying to protect this thing that I thought was great about this painting and work on other parts. And I found that over time was kind of stifling my ability to kind of move forward. And so in the situation that I'm in now, because I'm in between shows, I will work on a painting, and the next day when I come down to work on it, whether it's something I love or not, I may scrape half of it off, or I may paint over half of it. And what I'm painting over it with may not always be more appealing to me, but going through that process and having the courage to destroy it, whether it needs destroyed or not, sometimes it's going to help me down the road, find that thing that I've been looking for without actually looking for it.
So you're a super busy person and a dad.
Yeah.
Have a son.
Yes.
So what else? What do you do for fun?
I read a lot. I love to read. I'm also kind of a big project guy, so I always feel like I need to have some sort of goal to work on, some kind of fairly short-term, 6-month, 9-month kind of project. So like last year, I started to really get into running, and last fall, I ran my first trail marathon.
I saw that.
Yeah, something for me a project or a goal.
Trail marathon?
Trail marathon. It was great.
Wow.
And so right now, a couple months ago, I started going to Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes. It's great.
That could come in handy if people criticize your paintings.
Right, yeah. If I ever get good enough to be able to choke someone else, yeah.
Speaking of music, what should we be listening to? I know you're really good at this.
I've kind of been all over the place lately. I talked to you about it not too long ago, but I've another project I set up for myself. Because I don't know why I have to do this, but I made a goal for myself in this year to listen to 100 albums from front to back that I've never listened to before or don't recall, which could be a lot.
That happens all the time.
Yeah, that I don't recall listening to. So I've really been all over the place, eras and genres. Most recently, like contemporary music that I've been most impressed by is the rapper Rhapsody. She had an album come out late last year called Eve, which completely blew me away. And there's also a jazz musician who's been making work over the last several years named Kamasi Washington. One of the reasons I had to do this project is because I find myself still listening to the same stuff I listened to 25 years ago or 30 years ago because it changed my life at that time when music changes your life. Yeah. And I still hold on to that stuff and I still love it. And I listened to Run DMC all the time.
Right.
So I'm a creature of the music that I loved when I was in my late teens and early 20s. But I've tried to make myself experience things, both new things that I haven't heard before and things that came out back in my day that I never took the time to listen to and probably should have.
Yeah, somebody just turned me on to, not too long ago, Coleman's Giant Steps. Even the song itself, Giant Steps. And then, of course, I go online. I'm like, you listen to it and you go, I don't think I've ever heard anything like this in my life. And I went online and there's this whole thing about giant steps and how he freaked out the art world because they had never put together this combination of sounds before. And so, every jazz musician tries to play that song, but kind of can't because it's the hardest song ever. And there's even clips like on YouTube of these guys going, it's impossible. It can't be done. But it's on recording. And I think it was Art, that
makes
turned
sense.
me onto it. Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay, bold prediction for 2020.
I think I might get a dog in 2020. That's my boldest prediction. My wife will probably cringe when she hears this, but that's my bold prediction of
Don't you
2020.
have one?
I had a dog. He passed away last year.
Aw.
He was 17 years old. I mean, he had lived a pretty great life. So we moved into a new house. We have a fenced-in yard. My son is 10 years old. I feel like we're dog people.
Okay, so now we're going to do something that we call the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions, and you got to give it to me. The first thing that comes to your mind when I give you a word. Picasso.
Original. I say original because, I love painting. One of the interesting things about painting is it's such an old art form that,
Cave drawings.
Yeah,
Right,
although people are always doing cool things, if you really want to break it down, people aren't really doing original things. I mean, we're all putting our spin on something that's been very well established for thousands of years. Again, if we want to talk about drawing, we can go all the way back to cave painting and cave drawing. But I think that there are artists that pop up, every several generations that really feel like real original voices. And I think obviously that Picasso is one of those.
Okay, another word, Columbus.
Columbus is a great town to be an emerging artist in. Columbus has a lot going for it, but I think if we're talking specifically about art, I think that Columbus has a great museum. I think that Columbus has a great art school. I think that Columbus has some really great galleries. Columbus has some great artists, and Columbus is very supportive, both from a civic point of view to the artists within the city and amongst the artists themselves. There's a real love affair, I think, between artists in the city who are always looking to support each other.
So in a way, it's kind of fertile ground for artists here versus, say, New York, where you will get stepped on.
Yeah, for sure. And I've said this before, where the relative success that I've had as an artist has a lot to do with the fact that I was an artist in Columbus, Ohio. If I grew up in Chicago or New York or LA or San Francisco or Miami, I don't know that I would have been given the room and the support to allow me to have the courage to keep doing what I'm doing and find the personal success in making work that I'm really happy with that I would have anywhere else.
I agree. I mean, it's a great town for that. And there's a lot of creative people here. And I think we owe it to some of the early retailers that came in and brought all these creative people in from all over the country and opened up shops and, and expanded. I can't think of another place in the U.S. that has really transformed itself as much as Columbus, Ohio.
I agree.
So what are you reading right now?
I'm a kind of a sci-fi guy, and I'm also a really big like dystopian fiction guy. So right now I'm reading a book called A Boy and His Dog at the End of the World, which may have some subtle reflection on the fact of my bold prediction for 2020.
Right.
But yeah, that's
Gotta
what I'm reading
that.
now. Right.
Okay. And you are addicted to?
I'm addicted to, having something to accomplish. Feel like I'm working towards something, and that I'm not just kind of wasting my day away.
Well, Joey, thanks a million for
Thank you.
coming and making this podcast a lot better. I really appreciate you sitting down and talking to us. So People, be sure and listen anytime for some more human interaction on hot topics, which, by the way, you are welcome to suggest. Also, be sure and subscribe to this podcast. WDcast is at WDpartners.com. Go to the menu hamburger and hit What We Think. Then go to the very bottom of that page, bottom center, and hit the podcast icon and peruse at will. We've got many great interviews in there, including with Google, Lionesque, EY, Donato's, Green Growth Brands, who's in hot water now, Whole Foods, and now the amazing Joey Monsoon. So thanks for listening, and think about this quote. In times of difficulty, you must not lose sight of your achievements. That's a really good quote, and if you guess who said it, I'll give you an undisclosed Whole Foods gift card. So, okay, stay frosty out there, my friends. Take care. Thank you.
Check it out, y'all. Check it out.